There is no in between with how we feel about running backs right now. You either look at your roster and you feel really good about where you're headed with the fantasy playoffs coming up, or you look at your roster and you've pressed the panic button because you're freaking out that your running backs aren't going to do anything for you down the stretch. Whether you hate your running backs or love your running backs, we need to try and find the best combination of players to give us fantasy victory in week 10. And that is what this video is going to do for you. Let's hop into my running back analysis for every matchup on the Week 10 slate. Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Hopefully everybody is doing well out there today. Week 10, we've got a lot to talk about because we got 4 more teams on a bye. And even though we've had a couple of bounce back performances, we've got a lot of question marks about the running back position this week. So make sure you hit that like button for me, turn on those bell notifications, so anytime we go live or drop content, you're going to be made aware of it. But before we jump into the content, my boy Taylor has a shout out to the sponsor for this video.
Hey everybody, it's Taylor back again to talk about Marine Layer, our sponsor. I really do love their clothes. I'm wearing this shirt, it's from there, and it's been through several washes already, still insanely comfortable, holding up super well. I don't even take it off to sleep anymore, honestly. But for real, last time I talked about the Respun program, and I went ahead and signed up for this tee recycling kit. I'm gonna throw several of my old t-shirts from the back of my closet in there and send it in and get a credit, because I've got my eye on a few things on their website that I probably gonna put on the Christmas list, or maybe just buy myself for Christmas, honestly, with that credit that I get. But with the holidays coming up, Marine Layer is giving a special discount to Headliner Nation. We actually have like our own link now. So you can go to marinelayer.com/headliners. That's 15% off your entire order at marinelayer.com. Maybe you're looking for a gift for you or somebody for the holiday season. Marine Layer has you covered with literally the perfect gift. You can go once again to marinelayer.com/headliners for 15% off your entire order for a limited time. They're saving your closet, or even somebody else's if you're buying a gift, I guess. One t-shirt at a time.
Yo, Taylor, I appreciate you telling us about Marine Layer, but it is time to go and jump into all of the analysis for Week 10. Let's kick things off over on Thursday Night Football. Thursday Night Football is going to be a matchup for the ages. And by that, I mean the matchup is going to be us fighting to keep our eyes open by the time 9 o'clock rolls around. Because Carolina and Chicago should be nowhere near Thursday Night Football, or honestly any primetime game. But the good news is that we might find some running back points here, because right now both of these teams are in the bottom third of most fantasy points allowed to the running back position. Now, Miles Sanders isn't getting nearly as many touches as Chuba Hubbard right now, and even though Chuba Hubbard isn't doing a ton with his touches, this is definitely the matchup that he could help you out. Since week 4, Chuba Hubbard has only averaged over 4 yards per carry one time. But in that same stretch, he has at least 14 carries in all but one game. So if you've been struggling to find running back help, honestly, Chuba Hubbard is going to have a decent amount of volume again this week, and it's going to be a much better matchup for him to potentially put up some better numbers. Am I thinking he finishes like a top 15 running back? Probably not. But the guy definitely could be of service to your fantasy team this week. Now, on the flip side of things, Khalil Herbert may be back for the Chicago Bears this week. There's no guarantee as of yet, and that's why I have him listed in red. For D'Onta Foreman, if we find out for sure that there is going to be no Khalil Herbert this week, then D'Onta Foreman will go to a green for me. But for right now, I'm just being cautious until I know more information about Herbert. Now, it really feels like D'Onta Foreman is getting a lot of love for his performances over the last few weeks. But realistically, when you look at it, he was the RB1 a couple of weeks ago, and outside of that, he has failed to be a top 24 running back. So do I think he has a huge ceiling this week? Going up against Carolina, it is possible, but Carolina also did a decent job of stopping Zach Moss and Jonathan Taylor this past week. So I'm not ready to toss in that type of high upside, but I do feel like he makes it back inside the top 24 on Thursday Night Football just based on sheer volume alone. Indianapolis and New England is going to bring a matchup of a couple of running backs that we absolutely need to ball out down the stretch. Now, Jonathan Taylor is going to remain in green for me again this week, but the bigger news is going to be Zach Moss and whether or not he's absolutely getting floored with his production right now. Because in their matchup against Carolina this past week, and with a huge sizable lead going into the second half, it really felt like Zach Moss was going to see a lot of carries, and it just didn't happen. Now, this matchup against New England is not great by any means, and if Indianapolis finds themselves a negative game script at all, it really feels like Jonathan Taylor will find himself on the field way more often. In fact, Jonathan Taylor played 45 snaps compared to Zach Moss's 13 snaps. He also ran 21 routes compared to Moss's 3 routes, and he had nearly double the amount of carries on the ground. Not just that, but Taylor has also had at least 18 carries in 2 of the last 3 games. So all of the usage numbers tell us right now that Zach Moss definitely is on the decline and very soon may not even be fantasy viable. For those of you that still own Zach Moss, you might not be able to put him in your lineup right now, and it would be very risky to try and do so again this week. But you also cannot drop him either, because if anything happens to Jonathan Taylor, we already know what Moss can do in this system. For those of you holding on to Rhamondre Stevenson, first off, thank you for listening to us and not just dropping him. If you were able to upgrade at the position with him in a trade, absolutely, but he's now finally producing like the guy that we needed him to when we drafted. So is it sell high time, or are we still riding this till the very end? Well, considering the Colts allow the 5th most fantasy points to the running back position, I'm absolutely going to ride Rhamondre Stevenson once again this week. Their defense as a whole is also ranked 24th against the run right now as well. One area that I really like Stevenson in again this week is his work in the passing game, because the Colts have allowed the 7th most receiving yards to the running back position this season. And over the last 4 weeks, Stevenson has saw at least 6 targets in the passing game 3 times. His efficiency is also looking way better right now, because over the last 4 weeks, he's averaging well over 4 yards per carry once again. Over the course of the first several weeks of the season, he never touched 4 yards per carry 1 time. Stevenson had 78 yards after contact and forced 3 missed tackles this past week. Definitely looking like the game-breaking running back that we saw at times last season. Over the last 4 weeks, he has 2 top 10 performances and 1 top 24 performance as well. Yes, it's going to be risky continuing to start him, knowing how dysfunctional this offense can be at times. But unless you're packaging together with somebody else to get a really big upgrade at the running back position, we can't just trade him away for pennies on the dollar because you've been frustrated this year. For right now, in this matchup, we're continuing to roll with Rhamondre Stevenson. And then if you get an opportunity to move him for a much bigger piece, then you could potentially do so. But I think we're going to see a lot more top 24 performances down the stretch, and he's going to do what we really have been hoping for all season. The Cleveland and Baltimore matchup is really going to be a tale of 2 different snap counts from last week. Let me explain. We'll start with the Browns. Last week, Jerome Ford saw 47 snaps compared to Kareem Hunt's 21. That's a super wide range there. Jerome Ford winning by quite a bit. And if you've been watching for a few weeks now, you know that I'm not the biggest Jerome Ford supporter in the world. That could be seen this past week. Once again, he was very inefficient. Jerome Ford continues to be a guy that really needs to rip off a big play to be fantasy viable. But even with that being said, I still can look at the numbers and tell you that something seems up with last week, because it's not like Jerome Ford just got a ton of snaps towards the end of the game when Cleveland ended up going up by quite a bit and had control of it. Kareem Hunt really didn't see a consistent workload until the second quarter. Jerome Ford was the guy to start the game. And maybe it has something to do with the fact that Kareem Hunt continues to be beat up and Jerome Ford was just feeling better. Maybe it had to do with the matchup and Cleveland just just thought Jerome Ford fit what they wanted to do a little bit more. Maybe Jerome Ford got the start, didn't get it done, and then they went to Kareem Hunt because he scored yet again. I really don't know what the explanation was for Jerome Ford seeing such a high discrepancy in terms of his snaps. But in this matchup this week, another tough one going up against Baltimore, we could see the same ineffective gameplay from Jerome Ford. But it is his work in the passing game that could set him apart this week. Last week, Jerome Ford ran 20 routes out of the backfield, while Kareem Hunt and Pierre Strong only combined to run 8 themselves. And I do think with this game being at home against Baltimore, that Baltimore controls it and beats Cleveland yet again. This is going to be a really tough matchup to face this week. And for Jerome Ford, he's going to need to make up his fantasy points in the passing game. If we can get him the same 7 targets that he saw last week, it could definitely bump him up into the top 24 range. I'm not expecting a touchdown from Kareem Hunt this week, and I'm really not expecting a big day from Jerome Ford. The only thing I'm hoping for is enough catches and enough receiving yards that Jerome Ford can put himself into the RB2 conversation. We also saw a huge discrepancy in the snap count for the Ravens as well, but we can help form that story a little bit better. Gus Edwards only played 14 snaps, got 5 carries, and yet still scored 2 touchdowns. But this week, people are going to be getting super hyped up about Keaton Mitchell. And I get it, but Jerome Ford is still the starter, regardless of the numbers that you saw last week. In fact, in the first quarter, Keaton Mitchell didn't even see a touch. It was Gus Edwards with 8 snaps and Justice Hill with 7. Then partway through the second quarter is when Keaton Mitchell found the field. And at that point going forward, Gus Edwards didn't play a whole lot. In fact, he didn't even play the fourth quarter. It was the score. Gus Edwards was banged up at the beginning of the week with an issue with his toe. Baltimore was winning this game. Baltimore saw the lead early and they never gave up. It was the perfect opportunity to get Keaton Mitchell going, even though Justice Hill still ended up seeing over 40 snaps this past week. And this matchup is going to be super tough on the ground going up against Cleveland. When they played a couple of weeks ago, Justice Hill was able to crack 33 yards on 3 carries, but Gus Edwards, who had 15 carries, wasn't able to average 4 yards per touch. That's definitely going to be probably the same thing we see this week going up against Cleveland. If Baltimore can get into the red zone, absolutely, Gus Edwards is going to get those touches. And that's why I'm still going to leave him in yellow. And while people should be excited about what Keaton Mitchell might be able to do moving forward, for this week, Keaton Mitchell could show us whether or not he's firmly taking over as the RB2. And that will be evident by how many touches he gets towards the beginning of the game. But for this week, even though the volume isn't going to be there for Gus Edwards, and even though he's not going to put up a ton of yards on the ground, we definitely have a guy that is getting all the touches at the goal line and in the red zone right now. And with the way Baltimore's offense is playing, even against a really good Cleveland defense, Baltimore could absolutely find themselves with enough touches at the goal lines to get Gus Edwards in the end zone once again. After a week with no Dameon Pierce, we still have more questions than answered about the Houston backfield. Because even though Devin Singletary was the main guy last week, he did absolutely nothing going up against that Tampa Bay front. And now this week with potentially Dameon Pierce back, there's really no telling who's going to get the majority of the workload. And as of right now, I'm treating this backfield as a true 50-50 split. There are some backfields out there with a true 50-50 split that you could play multiple running backs in because they have a high upside every single week. We have seen no upside, not even medium upside, from either of these running backs for the entire season. So even though you may want to hold on to both of them because it's better to have some depth than no depth at all, we're not starting them anytime soon. Joe Mixon was able to find the end zone for the second week in a row, and Joe Mixon continues to be exactly what we've talked about all season long. He's a really solid RB2, and every once in a while, he's going to give you an RB1 performance. And that's what happened once again. The touchdown put him into RB2 range yet again, and when you take a look at the stats, that's where his consistency's been all year. With the way fantasy football is right now, if I were to tell you that I could give you a running back to keep on your roster, that when you put him in your your lineup, he's going to finish as a top 24 running back 62% of the time, you absolutely would take it. So we really shouldn't be disappointed with anything Joe Mixon does right now, because where you drafted him at gives you absolute value for the numbers that he's putting together right now. He's been one of the only guys that continues to find the field on a consistent basis, and he's one of the only guys that continues to finish as a top 24 running back more times than not. And this week could get a little bit interesting because Houston's defensive front does a decent job of limiting running backs, because right now they've allowed the 10th fewest rushing yards in the NFL. However, they have allowed quite a few fantasy points still to the running back position. Houston has allowed the 11th most fantasy points to the running back position so far this season, and that's partly because they have allowed the 8th most receiving yards to running backs this year. So Joe Mixon is going to do what he's done best so far this season. He's going to get you a few receptions and a few receiving yards, which is exactly what we want in half PPR and PPR leagues. He's going to have a really good shot at potentially scoring a touchdown, because even though Houston is pretty good against the ground game, they could still move the ball down the field in the air, get into the red zone, and give Mixon another touch for a touchdown. Top 24 potential? Absolutely. Top 12? Probably not this week. Christian McCaffrey, the RB1. Travis Etienne, the RB3. There is no better matchup than this one for my Manscaped must-watch matchup of the week. Since it's November and we've all decided not to shave, you need to head on over to manscaped.com and get yourself their brand new beard hedger. This thing is an absolutely amazing tool for your face that can cut any beard and make it look stylish at any length. When you check out over on Manscaped, use code word headliners. They're going to give you 20% off your entire order and free shipping. Honestly, there's not a whole lot to say about this matchup. Both of these run defenses are not nearly as strong right now as they have been in previous weeks. And for Travis Etienne and Christian McCaffrey, they both help on the ground, they both help in the passing game, they're both on the field a ton, and they both score touchdowns. Now, if you would have bet at the beginning of the year that Christian McCaffrey would be the RB1, a lot of people probably would have said, yeah, sure, I could see that happening. The most important thing, though, is the guy continues to stay on the field. He was absolutely the #1 overall pick, and he continues to show why you should have taken him there. For Travis Etienne, the dude continues to be an animal. If you would have bet that he was a top 5 running back, a lot of you probably would have pushed back on that. In fact, I know a lot of you did, because he was a must-have for me this offseason, and I was told time and time again that Tank Bigsby was taking his job. I'm sorry, Tank who? Travis Etienne is in your lineup, Christian McCaffrey is in your lineup, and both of them are bringing you some fantasy points. A matchup of two teams, both inside the top 7 of fewest fantasy points allowed to the running back position this season. But for Alvin Kamara, the matchups haven't really mattered that much at all, because every single start since he's come back from his suspension, he's finished inside the top 24. This past week was his lowest performance to date this season, though. He saw under 10 carries for the first time all season, and his production from an efficiency standpoint just wasn't great. So what are we going to expect from this matchup against Minnesota? Alvin Kamara has not averaged more than 4 yards per carry since his first game this season, and Minnesota is currently allowing the 12th fewest rushing yards in the NFL. Luckily for Kamara, his work in the passing game has really helped prop up his really low rushing floor. But Minnesota is only allowing the 4th fewest passing yards to running backs this season. This could definitely be a week where we see Alvin Kamara not reach the ceiling that he's had so far this season. But we're still starting him, and he's still going to be inside the top 12 because, again, the amount of receiving work, even if he doesn't get as many yards as we would like, he could still see plenty of targets to help his fantasy production with receptions alone. In football, one man's injury is another man's opportunity, and Alexander Mattison had not yet given up the starting role, but Cam Akers was on his heels and quickly gaining speed. Unfortunately, this past week, he suffered another torn Achilles, ending his season. Now, for those of you that have had to watch Alexander Mattison run for 2.5, 3 yards per carry all season long, you're going to be seeing a lot more of it. And now we're going to get a really tough matchup. I really don't see any type of decent ceiling for Mattison this week. And as crazy as this Josh Dobbs story is from this past week, coming in to lead Minnesota to victory over Tampa Bay, I don't see it happening against New Orleans. Dobbs got a lot of work to do to get up to speed and be able to take on a much better defense in New Orleans than what he faced with Tampa Bay. And if Dobbs isn't able to move the offense like he did last week, Alexander Mattison may get a decent amount of touches on the ground this week, enough to put him inside a flex consideration, but definitely not enough to give us the type of upside that would help us win a week. It's so refreshing to find a head coach that doesn't feel the need to lie to us. When Matt LaFleur said that Aaron Jones was getting a big workload this week, he was absolutely correct, because Aaron Jones carried the rock. Aaron Jones outsnapped A.J. Dillon 41-29. He saw 3 more routes run, had 4 more targets, and had a substantially larger amount of carries than A.J. Dillon, which is exactly what owners have been looking for, and Aaron Jones was able to find the end zone again as well. And now he gets the Pittsburgh Steelers, who have allowed the 4th most rushing yards in the NFL, and have allowed the 9th most fantasy points to the running back position. If we get anywhere near the same amount of a workload that we got last week from Aaron Jones, this week should be a pretty darn big week for him. Expect a top 10 performance. And while you can look at Green Bay in this matchup and know that Aaron Jones will more than likely get the majority of the touches and looks once again, you can't say the same thing about the Pittsburgh Steelers, because Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren are basically even right now, even though Jaylen Warren is looking better. Now, Najee Harris may have found the end zone this past week, but when you look at the numbers on the screen, it's really hard to figure out why Pittsburgh is not giving Jaylen Warren more touches. Because right now, he's averaging 4 less touches per game than Najee Harris, but he's only averaging 1 less yard. He's also been a top 24 running back in 50% of his games this year, and the average points for each week are exactly the same between the two. So it is 1000% clear that Jaylen Warren is doing more with less right now. But even with that being said, this is still a good matchup for both of these running backs. Right now, Green Bay is ranked 23rd against the run and fantasy points allowed to the running back position. And while Najee Harris will still see a majority of the touches this week, it's really boom or bust for him and a touchdown. If he doesn't score a touchdown, at best, he's typically going to see low running back 2 status. But with how good Jaylen Warren has been in the pass game and how efficient he has been on the ground, even if he gets less touches than Najee Harris, he could still put up more points. Heck, you can even see it from this past weekend. Najee Harris was able to find the end zone, and Jaylen Warren still finished less than 2 fantasy points behind him. So given this matchup, you could say that maybe Najee Harris has a little bit of a higher ceiling, but Jaylen Warren still, to me, has a better floor every week. Tennessee and Tampa Bay will bring a really interesting matchup this week for both Derrick Henry and Rachaad White. Because right now, Tampa Bay allows the 3rd fewest fantasy points to the running back position. But when you take a look through their matchup so far this season, you have to wonder if maybe that number isn't nearly as accurate as we would like it to be. Because to start the season, they had the Vikings and the Bears. Madison hasn't done anything on the ground this year, and really the rushing attack for the Bears wasn't that great in week 2. In week 3, when they faced the Eagles, they gave up 130 yards on the ground to DeAndre Swift. Then they got the Saints in Alvin Kamara's first game. The Detroit Lions, where David Montgomery ended up getting injured early on and they didn't have Jahmyr Gibbs available. The Atlanta Falcons and Arthur Smith once again refused to use Bijan Robinson. Then when they played the Bills, James Cook didn't get a ton of carries, but he averaged nearly 5 yards per carry in that game. And then this past week with Houston and Devin Singletary. So when you take a look at the numbers, they really haven't had that stiff of competition this year. And when they have, running backs haven't been that bad against them. So for me, given the matchup with Derrick Henry, I will say that he's got some medium risk so far this week. It is going to be a matchup that won't be insanely easy, but I don't think it's going to be nearly as tough as what the numbers show right now. And people continue to act frustrated with Derrick Henry, and it's not because he's not giving you good fantasy production. You're just used to a lot more fantasy production, and you're not willing to accept what he is currently. With Derrick Henry over his last 5 games, and 4 of those games, he's gone over 75 rushing yards. The biggest issue right now with him is he's just not scoring a ton of touchdowns, and Tyjae Spears is getting a lot of snaps. And to people just looking at those numbers, they're getting frustrated because they're wishing Derrick Henry was on the field more and scoring touchdowns. But he's one of the safest options in all of football right now. And honestly, who cares if Tyjae Spears is getting a lot of snaps? He's not doing anything with them. He's not scoring fantasy points. He's not taking away touches from Derrick Henry. He's just spelling Derrick Henry to try and keep him as healthy as possible. And honestly, that's really what we want anyway. In the matter of 3 weeks, Rachaad White went from a guy that was barely an RB3 to being inside the top 24. And part of that turnaround has been the work that he's got in the passing game, because since their bye, he absolutely has started seeing more work and more targets, which is absolutely fine. But the same point continues to be true for Rachaad White. This past week, his fantasy points were made off scoring 2 touchdowns. The previous 2 weeks for that, his fantasy points were made by getting a lot of work in the passing game. And sometimes you look at that and you say, Kyle, it doesn't matter how they're getting their points as long as they get their points. And that's why I've started to rank Rachaad White a lot higher over the last 3 weeks, because I do agree he's getting the points. I don't care how he's getting it. I just want to caution people. Rachaad White is averaging 3.4 yards per carry right now. He's not doing a great job breaking tackles. He's not doing a great job getting to the second level on the ground. If he doesn't score a touchdown and he doesn't see 7 targets a game, the dude is barely fantasy viable. Good news for all of you, over the last 3 weeks, he has seen an uptick in both of those departments. Will it carry over to this week? Rachaad White will continue to carry at least medium risk until we start to see him be more efficient. For Atlanta and Arizona, unfortunately, there's just not a whole lot of analysis to give you, because the only analysis that I can give you about Atlanta is that Arthur Smith is an idiot. I mean, that's just all there is to it. As far as NFL head coaches go, he may be one of the worst ones in football. I really don't know what to say about his coaching style at this point. And I think a lot of you watching would agree with me. Every time Bijan Robinson touches the ball, he's electric. He averages over 5 yards a carry. He's dynamic in the passing game. And for some reason or another, Arthur Smith just refuses to use him in that capacity. Now, at the beginning of the year, we knew that Tyler Algier was going to continue to get some touches. It only made sense with how much they ran the football. But this back and forth between using Tyler Algier more one week than Bijan Robinson, and Bijan Robinson all of a sudden being a healthy, non-healthy scratch, not playing that much in a game out of nowhere, and all of a sudden Cordarrelle Patterson getting touches, it's just none of it makes any sense. So if you want to sit Bijan Robinson, I understand your frustrations. I think everybody that owns Bijan Robinson is frustrated. And quite honestly, even though we said that we couldn't draft Bijan at the top of the first round this year, we're still surprised by how awful it has been to try and figure out what is going on in Atlanta. With that being said, though, this is a good matchup. Arizona is not a great run defense. They played a little bit better last week. But with that being said, you've got to run him out there. You got to play Bijan Robinson. If you own him, you used a first-round pick on him. You probably don't have the ability to even set him at this point with injuries and bye weeks and everything else going on at the running back position. So really, you just got to toss him in there. And every single week, you just got to hope that he breaks a big play or he finds a touchdown or something happens that benefits your team. And for Tyler Algier, if Arizona can't be as good as they were last week against Cleveland, then Algier's got an opportunity to find the end zone once again. But both of these guys carry a decent amount of risk every single week. It's just really trying to figure out, how do you deal with that risk? Do you day drink? Do you try to take a nap? Do you eat your feelings? Do you go and destroy your TV? Whatever it may be, find a healthy outlet for it, because we can't sit Bijan Robinson and it's going to harm your blood pressure the rest of the season. Now for Arizona, we can't give a ton of analysis in this matchup either, because we're waiting to hear about James Conner. He can be activated and potentially play this week. Now, as of this recording, that has not happened. There has been talk about him being activated and starting to practice, but we don't know if he's going to get on the field as of yet. As far as Emari Demercado goes, he was injured and off the field last week. Keontae Ingram was the starting running back, and he did absolutely nothing either. So if you own any Arizona running backs in this matchup, we're not using any of them unless James Conner comes back, because if he does, same thing with Bijan Robinson. You probably can't even afford to sit him at this point. Detroit and Los Angeles should be a really fun matchup to watch. A lot of really good players, strong defenses, strong offenses, and hopefully Detroit doesn't go in and crap the bed like they did against Baltimore on the road a couple of weeks ago. But when you take a look at the running game in this matchup, there's a lot to potentially like. Starting with Detroit, David Montgomery is expected to be back this week and is expected to start practicing. Now that could change at any moment in time, and towards the end of the week, we could find out that he's actually not going to be back. So continue to monitor that. But going forward, when David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs are both active, you can expect some pretty decent days for both of these guys. David Montgomery is going to continue to get a really large workload on the ground, and Jahmyr Gibbs is going to continue to sub in and out on the ground and also get a lot of passing work as well. David Montgomery is going to be looking for those touchdowns inside the red zone. Jahmyr Gibbs is hopefully going to have some more of those explosive plays. But if you own either of these guys or both of these guys, I don't care if one is in or one is out or both are in, we've got to be playing these guys moving forward. Now, the Chargers do allow the 6th fewest rushing yards in football right now, but then you take a look at their fantasy points allowed to the running back position, and it's a huge difference. And that's because the Chargers allow the 2nd most receptions and 2nd most receiving yards to running backs right now. That right there alone really helps prop up the fantasy value of Jahmyr Gibbs. So if I had to rank one above the other this week, as of right now, I would still go Gibbs, a higher ceiling over Montgomery, knowing that Gibbs has an opportunity to make a bigger impact in the passing game, and that David Montgomery may not even be fully healthy as of yet. Austin Ekeler was able to score a pair of touchdowns this past week, and that really saved him, because outside of that, he looked awful. Lots of drop passes, not very efficient on the ground. Going up against a tough Detroit run defense this week could present some more problems again for him. Now, his work in the passing game alone continues to keep him right here as a green start for me every single week. They're too banged up right now in the passing game, with Mike Williams and Josh Palmer both being on IR, and Quentin Johnson not really developing into a formidable wide receiver as of yet. Now, there's still time for that to happen. But as far as Austin Ekeler goes, he's going to be a main outlet for Justin Herbert this week. And it really depends on how the game script goes for Los Angeles. Detroit, I guarantee, is going to try and control the game with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery and keep Justin Herbert off the field as much as possible. When Justin Herbert does get on the field, if they're going to be playing from behind, absolutely, Austin Ekeler is going to see a ton of targets once again. Either way it goes, even if his ceiling isn't as high this week as we would like, he's still a guy that makes his way into the top 15 conversation every week based on the passing upside alone. The Giants and the Cowboys are going to be about two running backs that are extremely gifted and talented, but just can't seem to find enough efficiency to hit their ceiling this season. Saquon Barkley continues to find himself inside the top 24 since he came back from his injury. A large part of that, though, is the fact that he continues to get so much volume. His average of 24 touches per game right now are beating out Travis Etienne, Christian McCaffrey, and even Alvin Kamara. He's seeing a ton of work on the ground and through the air, and mainly because they don't have anything else. They've been beat up at the quarterback position. They haven't had any wide receivers step up. Darren Waller's been a bust of a trade so far for the Giants. And this offense as a whole right now is a mess. And now they're facing a Dallas defense that can be super tough at times. So as far as Barkley goes this week, you're absolutely starting him because he has a very decent floor based on the fact that he gets 24 touches a game. And knowing that we're probably going to get DeVito at quarterback again this week, he's absolutely going to have that same exact floor because he's probably going to see 20 plus touches once again. As far as his ceiling goes though, that's why he is a risk, because even though we could probably say, hey, we're going to lock Saquon Barkley inside the top 24 based on volume alone, his chances of getting into the top 12 right now are not good unless he scores, because even though he's been a little bit better efficiency over the last couple of weeks, he's still not averaging 4 yards a carry, and he's still not breaking a ton of tackles or making a ton of people miss because he's getting hit so quickly behind the line because people are keying on the run. He's going to find a big break every once in a while and put together a big run, but more times than not, he's going to get absolutely stuffed. Continue to start him for his floor. Just don't pray for a ceiling. When it comes to Tony Pollard, quite honestly, he just doesn't fit into a Mike McCarthy scheme. What Kellen Moore did with this team, absolutely, Tony Pollard fit perfectly into that type of system. But Mike McCarthy wants to try and run the ball up the middle and use this 1984 style run game, and you don't use what Tony Pollard is so good at. You've basically removed getting him into open field, which is his best part of his game. So for me, when you take a look at what Tony Pollard is doing, it's really nothing to do with Tony Pollard. It's everything to do with the coaching staff wanting to continue to just run their game plan and not even try to figure out what the best assets of their players are. Now, I will say this could be the perfect opportunity, though, to get Tony Pollard going. And for those of you out there that own him, I've been saying for weeks, try to trade him. But this could end up being the perfect week because going up against the New York Giants defense, if Dallas can get out in front and get the score at a point where they're just controlling the clock, then Tony Pollard should hit his current line over on underdog of 60.5 rushing yards. And given the fact the Giants are currently ranked 25th against the run in the NFL, I am absolutely going to take that line as an over with my pick'em over on underdog this week. And if you're interested in playing any pick'ems with us, make sure that you sign up over on underdog using code word headliners. For the pick'ems that we talked about this past week in our live stream, we went 13 of 17. We're absolutely killing it right now. So make sure you sign up over on underdog. Use code word headliners. They're going to match your deposit up to $100, and you're going to get a special pick'em that's almost guaranteed to hit that you can play right along with this one for Tony Pollard. Washington and Seattle is like a tale of two different seasons for these running backs. Brian Robinson for Washington has had some really good games this year, but then against like some absolutely smash opponents, the game plan for Washington is just garbage and Brian Robinson isn't able to do anything. And then he's got a game against a tougher opponent and he actually plays pretty decent. It's really tough to figure out in any given week what we are getting from Brian Robinson. The good news about Brian Robinson is that Antonio Gibson still isn't seeing a ton of work, maybe a little bit more in the passing game as of recent, but Brian Robinson is the one scoring touchdowns. When they get in the red zone, Brian Robinson is on the field, so he's got pretty good touchdown potential every single week. Kenneth Walker, he started off hot. He was one of the safest running backs in football at the beginning of the season. From a fantasy points perspective, the dude was doing awesome for us, and he's still right now in the top 7 running backs, even though he has scored less than 10 fantasy points the last 2 weeks combined. This matchup against Washington, it's middle of the road. It's not going to be a super easy matchup, and it's definitely not going to be tough either. My main concern with Kenneth Walker is just his health. If he's got another week to get healthy, and this week going up against Washington, he's feeling a lot better, my hope is that we can see at least 15 carries for him this week. And if he can get back to being more efficient, he's definitely going to be inside the top 10. But if he's still banged up or still limited for any reason, we definitely definitely could be looking at another tough week where he brings in less than 10 fantasy points. But once again, like I've mentioned with him and a lot of the other running backs in this video, the running back position right now, we don't have a whole lot of room to sit guys like Kenneth Walker or Brian Robinson. Both of these guys are RB1s on the season, and both of them will be in our lineups once again. Say what you want, make all the jokes that you want, laugh at the Sunday Night Football matchup between the New York Jets and the Las Vegas Raiders, because you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to be sitting over here absolutely enjoying this matchup, because Breece Hall and Josh Jacobs are about to go off. If you own either of these guys, this is the high upside plays that you're absolutely looking for this week. What do you do if you're the New York Jets and you're facing one of the worst run defenses in all of football and you can't seem to figure out how to pass the football? You pound it down their throat with Breece Hall. What do you do when you're Las Vegas and that you have a rookie quarterback going up against one of the NFL's best passing defenses, but can't seem to figure out how to stop the run? You pound the football with Josh Jacobs. Right now, Breece Hall's doing a little bit more with a little bit less. He's not getting nearly as many touches as Josh Jacobs, but his big playability is absolutely game-breaking and allows him to score from anywhere on the field or put up 20 yards at will. Going up against the Las Vegas run defense that allows the third most rushing yards in the NFL, Breece Hall could absolutely have himself a day. Now Las Vegas does look like they are playing better under their new head coach and new revamped coaching staff, and they've got a little bit more life to them. They could still win this game, but Breece Hall could still have himself a day. For Josh Jacobs, he's doing a little bit less with just a little bit more because he's getting a really good amount of touches, 26 rushing attempts this past week. And they even made the comment as a coaching staff that they wanted to get back to pounding the football and utilizing the stars on this field. They even looked at it as like the Dallas Cowboys. They said, hey, when Dallas ran the football and threw the football, you know it was going to Emmitt Smith and you knew it was going to Michael Irvin. And we're going to be doing the same thing. Davante Adams and Josh Jacobs, we've got to get these two guys going. The New York Jets allow the 7th most rushing yards in the NFL, and their pass defense is so good, it makes absolutely no sense to have Aiden O'Connell throw the ball 35 or 40 times in this game. Pound the ball with Josh Jacobs, control the field, let him have himself a day, and have a chance to win this game. But Breece Hall and Josh Jacobs are both going to be top 5 running backs for me this week, and if you own either of them, buckle up because it's going to be a good one. For Monday Night Football, the Denver Broncos and the Buffalo Bills, there's going to be a lot of question marks about the running backs in this game, but let's take a look at Javonte Williams first. Right before the bye week, we saw Javonte Williams go back-to-back weeks with his largest amount of carries of the season. And even though he wasn't super efficient in week 8, he still looked pretty good, putting together 85 yards on the ground. And then on top of that, he also added a receiving touchdown. And for Javonte Williams, it does absolutely look like they're trying to get him going again. And the explosive Javonte Williams that we used to saw may not be there as much as we would like. But if Denver can find themselves in any type of a positive game script, I can figure that they're probably going to be using Javonte Williams quite a bit. But their defense does suck, and they are on the road against Buffalo this week. So the chances of them being able to run the football with Javonte Williams 27 times again probably isn't going to happen. Now, Buffalo, they can give up some pretty decent sized runs on the ground. So definitely expect Denver to try and control the game early on with Javonte Williams. But if the score gets out of control quickly, he loses all of his ceiling, and really you won't have a whole lot left to go for the rest of the game. I decided to leave Jaleel McLaughlin on the slide for one more week, but he's quickly running out of time to be the PPR back that we thought he was going to be a couple of weeks ago. Since he had back-to-back weeks of top 10 performances, he hasn't done absolutely anything. Over those 2 games, he had 9 total targets. Over the last 3 games, he has 6 total targets. He hasn't seen more than 2 targets in a game in his previous 3 games. And really where he was doing the majority of his work in the passing game, he's not being utilized because Samaje Perine is still being looked at a little bit as well. So as of right now, it's really Javonte Williams is the lead back, and then Samaje Perine and Jaleel McLaughlin sharing a whole lot of touches after that. And since this is a game that could go into a negative game script, maybe we do get to see Jaleel McLaughlin this week. But honestly, given his past 3 performances, I'm not going to recommend that we even try to figure it out with him in our lineup. All right, I'm sure a lot of you are in this section of the video because you need to know about whether or not you're playing James Cook this week, or if you do, whether or not you should trust him. And when you saw his name in green, you probably were like, Kyle, have you been drinking during the day? No, I haven't been drinking during the day. Thanks for asking, though. I've got a really good feeling about James Cook this week, though. Everybody continues to talk about Leonard Fournette taking away from James Cook, but quite honestly, I don't think Leonard Fournette was signed to take away from James Cook. I think he was signed to replace Latavius Murray, and some of the numbers that we saw from this past week against Cincinnati back up that sentiment. Over the last few weeks, James Cook had been splitting early down snaps with Latavius Murray, but through the first 3 quarters of the game against Cincinnati this past weekend, he saw 100% of the early down snaps. And Latavius Murray had been dominating the 3rd down snaps as well. But over the first 3 quarters of the game, Latavius Murray and James Cook were 50-50 on 3rd down snaps. Now, unfortunately, when they got to the 4th quarter, Latavius Murray was on the field a majority of the time because they were using him for pass blocking because they were down by so much. The run game absolutely disappeared early in this game for Buffalo because they had to throw to keep up with Cincinnati. And because of that, James Cook did not have a great week when you just look at the box score or you just look at fantasy stats. And like always, I tell you all, you can't do that. You have to dig a little bit deeper. And seeing James Cook get such a large majority of the workload this week, even though it didn't turn into fantasy points, should be good news for those of you that still have him moving forward. And given fact that the Denver defense allows the most rushing yards this season and the most fantasy points to opposing running backs, I definitely feel like James Cook is in for a really solid day. Now, does he have a huge ceiling this week? Probably not. And that's just because he hasn't had a huge ceiling all season. But he definitely has a safe floor for me. And that's why I'm listing him in green, because I would be willing to bet he sees at least 15 carries in this game. And because he's averaging almost 5 yards a carry still, he definitely could put together a really solid day that firmly puts him inside the top 24. But who knows, if he scores a touchdown or maybe 2, top 12 potential would absolutely be within reach. Yo, Headliner Nation, there you have it. All of my research for every matchup in week 10 for the running back position. And I really hope that you enjoyed this video because honestly, before the week started, I took a look at how I was recording and editing and doing all these with the videos because I was really starting to feel rushed. And I felt like it was starting to kind of show up in the production and presentation of the videos. So I did something a little bit differently this week with how I researched, then recorded, then edited. And I really didn't feel nearly as rushed. And I hope that shows on camera, and I hope it shows with the quality of the video. So let me know down in the comments below if you thought that this video was a little bit better than the running back videos that you've seen so far this season, or if you were like, you know what, Kyle, still sounded great to me. And if you hated it, then I guess you can let me know if you hated it as well. But I'm going to get out of here today, Headliner Nation. Make sure that you hit that like button on the way out and make sure you hit that bell notification. So every time we go live or drop a video, you're going to know about it. Peace out, Headliner Nation. Stay safe, stay healthy. I'll catch you all in the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.